Okay, so as you can see, this is another of the Li Bai poems, and I would say actually this is my favorite of these early Li Bai poems that we have a bunch of just at the beginning of Du Fu's collection. This one is called 春日忆李白, on a spring day recalling Li Bai. And I said this is my favorite of these first ones, and it probably helps that this is not actually written to Li Bai, but about Li Bai. Because somehow it seems like Du Fu had this kind of neurosis in relation to Li Bai. He was quite he was intensely aware of Li Bai's superior abilities as a poet, his immense genius, his towering stature in Du Fu's mind cannot be doubted when looking at these poems, and we also have it here, just straight up in the first line. 白也诗无敌, poems without rival. His poetry is without any rival at all. That was Du Fu's critical opinion, and it is the critical opinion that has been the one of ages to come as well. If anyone can approach Du Fu, it is Li Bai. If anyone can approach Li Bai, it's Du Fu. And yeah, I mean, somehow I think that, I mean, Du Fu was and at this point he was a young man, and he's absolutely still not in full possession of his developed poetical powers. I mean, we reach a place somewhere at the beginning of the Andalusian rebellion where Du Fu really comes to the fore as this totally inescapable poet of the Tang dynasty. He's not there yet at this point, though of course we have plenty of intimations that he will become a person like that, and his poetry at this point is still very good in places. Just look at the first poem, for example, that I talked about, the Gazing on the Peak, Wang Yue. It's an extraordinary poem, and he has extraordinary poems also at this point in his career, but I can well imagine that he felt inferior to Li Bai, and this sort of inferiority, I think, is somehow translated in a kind of complicated relationship as a friendship towards Li Bai, and the sort of atmosphere that you get from these poems is not altogether untroubled by this. But in this poem, I think it's different, because this poem really is sort of has much more manly and straightforward tone, and it has really none of that stupid sort of neurosis that we can sort of understand from a psychological point of view, but we can't really forgive it from a political point of view. So that's maybe enough of these preliminaries. But I would just say that I'm not in any way disparaging Du Fu here, of course. I mean, Du Fu, he really became a better poet, sadly, I suppose, after the Great War, the Great Andalusian Rebellion broke out. It seems like Du Fu was always a poet who could not but suffer. Suffering seemed to bring out the best in him as a poet, and his suffering taught him to see the whole of creation, basically, in all the little things that he came across. And Li Bai seems to have been not like that at all. He was more of a person who had access to these things even in joy. Anyway, let's look at the poem instead of just talking randomly. 白也诗无敌，飘然思不群. What an extraordinary couplet, isn't it? Li Bai ye, just like that. Li Bai it is, yes. But it almost sounds like an address. Li Bai, wonderful man. 诗无敌, poems without rival. His poetry without any rival whatsoever. 飘然思不群, thoughts not like others. Yes. So what are we to understand by this? Sorry, I had to sort of look at my notes a little bit here. Usually I prepare this before, but now I just hit go without whatever. So I'm trying to keep a little bit of structure to these things, even though they are quite spontaneous, these videos that I make. Just let me look a little bit. Oh, here we have it. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about this 思不群, thoughts not like others. I think it sounds like we hear a connection here between this 思不群 and 无敌. It's like it's because his thoughts are unconventional that his poems are 无敌 like this. And as I just said, of course, no one disagrees with this either. No one disagreed with it back then that Li Bai was an unconventional poet and that he was the greatest of the Tang poets. So there's nothing strange about this, but this is just a wonderful summation of this critical opinion which Du Fu shared with his contemporaries and with ages to come. Then we have 清新与开府, 俊逸报参军. You can probably guess that these two people are poets. This Yu Kaifu is the poet Yu Xin, and Kaifu is, of course, this is not his name. It's his name is Yu Xin. Yu Xin, actually. I'm mispronouncing it. Yu Xin. Kaifu was after one of his official titles in life, and the same, of course, with this Bao Canjun. Bao Canjun is the poet Bao Zhao. So both of these poets are much earlier than Du Fu and Li Bai. Yu Xin lived in the 6th century before the Tang Dynasty, and Bao Zhao was even earlier. Adjutant Bao and Commander Yu. And they are the qualities that we associate with these two, at least that Du Fu associates with these two, are in one case fresh and clear, original and fresh, because of course he's comparing Li Bai here to these two earlier poets, so he's original and fresh like Yu Xin. And then he is Jun Yi, also uncommon, 不群, like it said in the earlier paragraph, like not vulgar and unrestrained. This is the sort of a summation comparing him to two earlier poets that I unfortunately don't know very well, but it would be interesting to go back and look at these two poets and their works and see what we can see in these qualities in them, because I think we should trust a great poet to also be a great critic of other poets, and Du Fu is at least a great poet. We can all agree on that. Yeah, these lines refer to Li's poetry, of course. Then we have 渭北春天树，江东日暮云. So the context of this poem is, of course, that they have been traveling together and they're not together anymore. So this is probably written about a year or so after their parting. And Du Fu is in Chang'an, the imperial capital, which is located at the Wei River, or north of the Wei River. And Jiangdong, well, Li Bai, for his part, he went to stay in the Yangtze region, the Jiangnan area. So Du Fu is constructing an opposition between the two localities. And we can also see here that it's spring, which it says in the title. 春日怀李白, which is the title of the poem. Or 怀李白, 忆李白, remembering Li Bai. The trees are turning to spring over in Chang'an, and the clouds are gathering for dusk, for twilight, at the place where Li Bai is, and presumably also where Du Fu is, because they live in the same time zone as we know, as global people. And the conclusion: 何时一樽酒，重与细论文. 何时一樽酒, this doesn't have to be commented on, of course. When will there be a goblet of ale this is interesting that Owen always translates jiu as ale. Perhaps actually the type of wine that they used to drink, or the type of alcohol that they used to drink back in those days, were actually more of an ale. I would love to hear more information about this. I love this Xi character. Again, with you in detail discussing literature. This is Xi, exactly. Writing is a fine point, the finer points of writing. That's exactly how you would express this in English. It's really the most natural way to translate it, but it's just such a wonderful little character here. You can just imagine the two of them, the two greatest poets in the Chinese tradition, when they sit together and they drink. And what do they talk about? Of course, they talk about literature, and they all both have their own very special perspective and their own very detailed opinions about what character you should put in a certain place, and what is the perfect tonality and the perfect description for a certain piece, and so on. I just love it. This just has to be. This is just a great summation of what their friendship was like at its best. So here we have it. No stupid new roses, no undue adulation, but just sort of a manly recognition of the great statues of his poetical predecessor and sort of contemporary, his senior at this point at least, though not for the ages. And yeah, a nice performance altogether. Thank you for listening.